Hey everyone. I've been sitting on this finished transcript for a few days now, itching to share it, but I figured I'd wait and give you guys a Christmas present. This relates to my personal search for a strange and nightmarish radio show that played on WSYR in Syracuse, New York, starting at midnight on August 12th, 1978. I was only 7 at the time, old enough to know that I liked staying up later than I was supposed to, so that I could listen to something that felt rebellious, but too young to understand everything I was hearing, or to have every childhood memory be solid and coherent. You remember being a kid and having an experience that stuck with you as you grow up, but you realize that it's fuzzy and unclear, sort of dreamlike. And the more you try to explain it, the more you find out you just can't, because details have been lost to time, and it's impossible to make perfect sense out of something you lived through. Yeah, this is like that. I spent my late Saturday nights as a kid listening to a radio show hosted by Manny Willem. Who, my point exactly? I brought this up in the server before, and just one of you even heard of the guy, only because they also grew up in central New York. So some context is going to be needed before I can get into his lost and last episode. My family was poor, and we couldn't afford cable TV, so radio was one of my main sources of entertainment. While other kids were going to movies on the weekends or watching Saturday morning cartoons, I was scouring the airwaves for new songs, or talk shows with topics that piqued my interest. And in a time when I was too young to watch SNL, I settled onto one of the few pieces of programming I actually made a conscious effort to listen to every time it aired. While my folks enjoyed their golden era Saturday Night Live, I kept my room's lights off and listened to Manny in the dark, which really set the mood. Manny had one of the voices for radio, a dulcet, clear, yet slightly deep and scratchy voice, like a version of Casey Kasem that smoked a pack a day. He had a quick wit, kept up to date on every offbeat news story and latest urban legend, and traded friendly barbs with his guests as he audibly puffed on his cigs at his booth. His topics included aliens, ghosts, cults, conspiracies, history's mysteries, and all things unexplainable. In other words, he ran a localized version of Coast to Coast AM, a decade before Art Bell went live with his show. Only, he didn't take calls, instead relying on his ability to read the fringes of society that wanted on his show, so that he could curate his own brand and quality of content. He'd answer fan mail, sure, but he was always clear that he didn't have time for nonsense on his show. Nor was he going to pursue every wild claim that would have otherwise come in through his speakers. Sadly for me, I only managed to catch the very tail end of his career that began as a typical daytime rock DJ and briefly morphed into one of the providers of early metal in the New York area. In 1975, he found his dream job, albeit at a very late hour. Just 3 years later, he announced his retirement as he knew it was only a matter of time before his lung cancer would make it too difficult to host a talk show. Still, for the year that I felt like I had a friend who shared in my taste for the weird and scary, I was one of the coolest kids at my school. Well, at least in my mind. None of the other elementary school students knew who I was talking about. If I had been born a little earlier, though, I probably could have been a part of some insider crowd at my middle or high school. I was barely old enough to understand the concept of a series finale when Manny's last show, announced in advance, played out on that hot August night. It ended so abruptly and oddly that I think I must have believed it was some sort of joke. I remember staying up a week later, waiting for him to come back on the air and give his listeners a proper goodbye. only to hear some BBC News story about the selection process for a new pope. Nothing about Manny, and in my young mind, where everything was a book with an ending that resulted in a closed book, that was that. Like a switch clicking off, it was the conclusion of one small part of my life, and I moved on, rarely thinking about the show. Yet it still lingered, as a blurry, poorly understood moment, like something insidious that hovered on the border of childhood memory and dream. Being in this community for a few months inspired me to pursue this on my own, and luckily, I never left the area and still had some old friends who helped me search. We started with broad strokes like these hunts always do, calling the radio station and asking about archives, or more information if nothing else. The furthest we got through official channels was in talking to one of the older managers who remembered the show, though he only listened infrequently. He pulled this number out about there being maybe only a couple thousand people max that tuned in for Manny. No idea how true that might be or where he would have gotten the statistic, but it wouldn't surprise me. I won't bore all of you with details about the search unless you want them later. A few weeks in, we find this local guy's post on Facebook about what to do with his late father's tape collection, and he's already responded to a question about what's on them. The reply: talk radio shows from the 70s through the 90s. We wonder why the dad wanted to archive them. I get in contact, and it's surprisingly just that easy this time. The next day, I'm at the son's place, in a room full of shelves holding old cassette tapes. He tells me he never really listened to any of them, but knew that his dad had built a library of shows he found interesting to go back to and pop in at his leisure. He was never much of a music guy, so this is what he had instead. The collection is well categorized, and I find the shelf packed full of Manny Willem tapes in minutes. It looks like he had every show recorded, and at the very end is, of course, the final episode. I'll note that most of the tape cases I saw in this room were dusty, with scratches in their cheap plastic. The August 12th Manny Willem show, however, had a particularly scratched and scuffed case, and less dust than the others. I took that as an indication that it had been listened to frequently. I ask if the dad ever might have made notes on the shows, or was known to look deeper into things, or if he remembered him talking about this tape more than the others after I plucked it out. Nah, he answers. His dad was a private person and kept busy with work, so he probably wouldn't have had time to compile theories or whatever else. I think that also explained the multiple old, worn-out Walkmans in a bin in the room. I'm gracious that he lets me borrow the tape, and I treat it like precious cargo on the way home, with it very possibly being the only known recording of the episode, in which case the collection may be one of a kind too. When I get home, I break out my old hardware and make a duplicate right away, and then I digitize the duplicate onto my computer. I run some basic filters and other audio enhancements on the file, because why not? Not like the sound quality from an analog AM station in 1978 is going to be that great. And I get to listening. Doing so returns me to my childhood room from so long ago, and sends a few shivers down my spine. Damn, it really came back to me all at once. After my first listen, I start over and get to transcribing, meticulously. I rewind and play it at a slower speed often, so that I can get every word, hear something I might have missed. And with the volume way up and the applied filters, I do notice some disturbing tiny moments and audio that no one would pick up on throughout a first listen. Something wasn't right in the recording booth during this show. I can't explain it exactly, but I will mention a few anomalies I picked up on during my transcription. Other than the things that are objectively there, maybe it's more of a personal feeling about the whole show. Like, there's a tension coming in through the audio, an oppressive darkness, for lack of a better word. I've excluded the breaks and the lead-ins to them to focus solely on the show. As always, it opens with several seconds of brain damage playing. You know, the central song on Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. And there it is, Syracuse. Manny comes in over the fade-out. The last time I ever get to play that for you. Bittersweet, our last show. Sorry that I have to leave you folks to explore and talk about the world's curios on your own. But just because my dream didn't last long or get a primetime slot doesn't mean I have regrets. Let's make them too few to mention tonight, won't we? I've been saving this one for a while, waiting for the perfect time. Didn't expect it'd be for the end, but I couldn't find a guest to outdo this one as our grand finale storyteller. You've never heard of this tale. And heck, I stopped him from telling me the whole thing because I wanted to keep some of the surprise for myself. Moving right along. Every minute of this hour needs to be a good one. How are you all doing tonight? Another rough week, like all the others. For old time's sake, I'm still going to open with a little throwaway news story and get my opinion in on world events, even for our last show. Now, I didn't really want to talk about this or give these lunatics any credence, but have you heard this controversy coming out of the science world? Last month in Manchester, a healthy boy was born. Nothing special about that, right? Well, this one, people are calling a test tube baby. Like he was grown in a vat, something you'd see in a 50s B movie, I don't know. And you got these knuckleheads and holier-than-thou types talking about how he wasn't born with a soul. And on the other side, we find conspiracy nuts saying he's been genetically engineered or some nonsense, as if he's going to grow up to be a super soldier or have psychic powers. Who knows, man? These insane ideas are getting harder and harder to keep up with. It's artificial fertilization, that's all. Taking a few of the more fun steps of the whole thing out of the process. It's going to be commonplace in a few years, you'll see. Well, unless, humanity just created an empty vessel that Satan can use to enter into our world. No, I'm not serious. The Omen was playing on HBO last night, and I watched it drunk. Okay, with that out of the way, let's welcome our guest waiting patiently in the other booth. His name is Stanislaw Kozak, and if you guessed that he was born in Poland, you'd be right. Mr. Kozak is probably the oldest guest I've had on. Do you mind if I tell them your age? Yes, he's 82 years old. Born in the 19th century. Imagine the things and places this man has seen. And that beard is magnificent. Now, Mr. Kozak, why don't you share with us your, hook? Remind me what that means, Stanislaw asks. What you said when we first got in touch. The crux of your story that got me to listen. I told you of the time I reported on the summoning of a demon. Mr. Kozak's accent is subtle, and he speaks clearly and succinctly for a man his age. We will soon find out that he's been in the country for many years. How do you like that, folks? Manny hypes the audience. If that doesn't glue you to your seat, I don't know what you've been waiting for these last 3 years. Summoning a demon. Of course, that isn't exactly true, is it? No, it is not, Kozak replies. But the truth is more complicated. This is, as you say, just the hook. Begin with something easily understood. Get the other party to listen. Give them a chance to become invested. Okay, friend. So if it's not a demon, what did you bring into the world?
Arrived in the hours when the world was cloaked in darkness,
And this happened in
finding solace in the stillness that others found unsettling.
Like ancient history.
A radio host with a
It is
voice
not
as
as long
smooth
ago
as
as you may
velvet
feel it is.
and a penchant for the strange and
A short jump
unexplained.
backward. in the grand
His
scheme.
listeners were
But a
captivated
very
by his
different
tales,
time, yes.
drawn in by the mystery and
television,
allure
no
of the
computers.
unknown. He was
Cars were
drawn to
simple
the
and
eerie
slow.
quiet of the late-night
people
hours
had ever
when the
flown.
world slept and shadows
And the
danced
Great
in the
Depression
corners
was
of the
about to
mind.
kick off.
It was
Your
in these
demon
moments
didn't have
that
anything to
Manny
do with
felt
that, did it?
most alive.
I doubt
His
it.
imagination
This
running
took place in
wild with
November, a month
possibilities.
after the crash.
His show, Whispers of the Night,
tell us,
was a beacon for
these
insomniacs and
summoners?
dreamers.
And is this
It was a
even what they set
sanctuary
out to do
for
originally?
those who found comfort
Or
in the
did they draw
unknown,
a pentagram,
a place where the
chant,
boundaries
and
of
black
reality
magic?
blurred, a place
They
where
were
ghost
mostly
stories
closer to
mingled with
scientists
local
than
legends,
believers in
and the
the occult.
impossible seemed just
These were
within
intellectuals
reach.
of the time,
Each episode
out to
was a
try
journey
and
into the
prove things as they
fantastical,
saw the world
a
changing
dive into the depths of
quickly
the
to
human
keep
psyche.
up.
But it was his
They knew the
fascination
old
with the
world of
dilapidated
mysticism and
hotel
ancient
on the edge
spiritual
of
beliefs
town
was
that would
dying.
change everything.
If magic
The
were ever
Hotel
real,
Erie Canal.
it was fading.
This place held a special allure
Alright.
for Manny,
So what
a
kind of
mystery he
people
couldn't
were in
resist,
this group?
a relic of a
How
bygone
many?
era now abandoned and
There were 12
shrouded
on
in
our
whispers
team.
of its own.
And several
The
other
hotel
groups
seemed to
just
call
like
out to
ours,
him its secrets waiting
all
to be
over the
uncovered.
world.
Locals
Visiting
spoke of
places
strange
that claimed to
occurrences
have been
within its
haunted,
crumbling walls,
and
cold
other
spots,
holy
unexplained
sites or
noises,
hallowed
whispers
ground.
that seemed to come from
We
nowhere,
looked for the beast
and a feeling
and
that
beings of
something
folklore going back
watched
centuries.
from the shadows.
Ghosts, spirits,
Manny knew he had to
demons.
explore it, to
We
uncover
saw
the truth
everything
behind the
from
legends.
fairies and skinwalkers
Little did he
to
know,
goblins and
this journey would
felkies.
lead him to the most chilling
Met people
discovery
claiming
of his
to be
life.
witches, tried to prove hexes were real. If
The
we were
Erie
in transit,
Canal,
on
a
train
waterway
or
that
ship,
once pulsed with
nothing
life,
else to do,
now flowed with an
we tried
unsettling
to speak with the
stillness.
dead.
Its waters,
Talk to one another
once a
through
bustling
telepathy.
artery of commerce and
Though
travel,
on occasion,
now seemed to whisper
even attempt
secrets
to
of a
conjure
forgotten
truth.
past. It wound
An
its way
entity
past
given
the
life
hotel
through
like a
the,
serpent, its murky depths
will of a
reflecting the
human
building's
mind.
desolate beauty.
Yes,
The canal seemed to guard
but
the
we never saw
hotel,
anything in
holding
this
on to
world
its
to prove
mysteries.
that there were more
Manny,
layers to
drawn by
reality.
the mystery,
Or
decided to
creatures
broadcast
left to
his show live from the
We had
hotel.
mentalists,
He was
a spiritual
intrigued by
healer,
the tales of
a
hauntings
proclaimed
and the
medium
eerie atmosphere
who had
that
grown
surrounded the
doubts in
place.
sincerity
He
of
hoped to
their own
capture the
ability.
eerie essence
A
of the
psychic
place,
who assured
the
us he
whispers
was
in the
once
air,
able to
the
move
shadows that
objects
seemed
from
to
a
move
distance
on
as a
their
child.
own. The stories
Even a
whispered
former
in the
exorcist
peeling
of the
wallpaper
Catholic
and
Church.
creaking floorboards.
Two experts
Every
in the
corner of the
esoteric and
hotel seemed to
folklore,
hold a piece of
and
its haunted
three
history.
skeptics who kept us
He
grounded
spoke
in
of the
truth
hotel's
and
history,
acted as a
of the
counterbalance
families who
to
once
any
filled its halls with
observations
laughter,
led by idealism.
and the travelers who
You
sought
say we.
refuge within its
Weren't
walls.
you only reporting
Each
others'
photograph
efforts?
told a story, each room
Several
a
of these
memory.
people were old friends,
But as the night
and I
wore
was
on,
ingrained within
the
the
atmosphere grew heavy.
Officially,
The air thickened with
my
an
role was
unspoken
to report
tension,
any
as if the
findings we
hotel
made to the
itself
others.
was holding its breath.
and to newspapers.
Objects
perhaps,
moved on
should
their
we
own.
witness or
A
find
vase
anything
tipped over,
substantially
shattering the silence with a
verifiable.
loud crash. Footsteps
that,
echoed in the empty
I also
hallways.
had plans to
Each
turn
step
my
seemed to
mountains
carry
of
the
notes
weight of
into
the
a book,
past, reverberating
chronicling
through
our
the
attempts.
darkness. And then,
Our well-funded
silence.
academic
The
journey
radio signal went
to
dead.
prove that anything
The only
other
sound
than
left was the
science
eerie
and
whisper of the
observable
canal
truth had merit,
outside.
or ever did. We followed a comprehensive
The static
process
returned.
wherever we went.
This time it was different,
Improved
more
upon.
frantic, more desperate. The
After
voice,
4
Manny's
years of
voice.
traveling,
It
we
was
were
garbled,
tired and ready to
distorted,
return
filled with an
home,
unnameable terror.
having proven
And then,
nothing. The
silence.
skeptics were winning.
The mystery of Manny Willem and the Hotel
Speaking
Erie
as one
Canal
myself,
remains unsolved.
you can't
Was it an
exactly
elaborate
prove that a
hoax,
mystical
a tragic
element
accident,
didn't
or something
at some
else?
point
Or did
exist
something
throughout
sinister
history?
lurk within those crumbling
Perhaps not.
ancient walls?
But what we had seen were nothing more than empty traditions, fear of unknowns that were no longer relevant in a modern age. The old ways, scattered among small villages in the places of the world that did not yet have electricity or indoor plumbing, futilely maintained by old men whose parents drilled into them concepts of cruel gods, fate, and sins. Shadows lurk, waiting for weakness to exploit, as frightful creatures in the woods look for the foolish to spirit away, and ghosts with unfinished desires haunt the night. No, we saw nothing that couldn't be disproven with logic, medicine, and light brought into darkness. They'd still make idols to false or dead deities, believing a greater mind continued to watch over them and dictated their rewards or punishments. I take it all of you were, or became, atheists.